An 85-year-old Marine veteran walks into his hometown diner, asking for nothing but a simple cup of coffee. But the local police officer doesn't respect his quiet dignity, and he doesn't just question him, he assaults him. He throws the old man to the ground, punches him repeatedly, and mocks his service, while everyone watches in silence. What the cop doesn't know is that this veteran's son commands something the town has never seen. And when you find out who his son really is and what he brings with him, you'll understand why some men should never be disrespected. If you believe that those who served our country deserve respect, not brutality, click the subscribe button. This story delivers the most powerful lesson in consequences you'll see all year. The town of Millridge hadn't changed much in 50 years, a blessing or a curse depending on who you asked. Main Street still featured the same brick buildings, the courthouse clock still chimed every hour, and Darla's Diner still served the best coffee in 3 counties. On Tuesday evenings, the diner transformed from daytime cafe to evening gathering spot, where the smell of fresh pie mingled with tired conversations about weather, politics, and whatever else filled the spaces between sips of coffee. Sergeant Major Thaddeus "Iron Tad" Mercer had developed a routine since returning to his hometown. Every Tuesday at 7 p.m. sharp, the 85-year-old Marine veteran would walk the 4 blocks from his modest home, his gait slow but deliberate, back straight despite the years. His weathered hands, still strong enough to crack walnuts, would push open the glass door of Darla's, the little bell announcing his arrival to a room that rarely looked up anymore. "Evening, Darla," he'd say in his graveled voice, removing his USMC cap as he settled at the counter. "Just coffee tonight." His eyes, still sharp as a hawk's, would scan the room out of habit, assessing exits and occupants. 5 decades removed from combat, but some instincts never fade. Across the diner sat Officer Bryce Holloway, his bulk spilling over both sides of the booth he occupied. At 38, Holloway represented everything wrong with small-town power unchecked. His badge, polished daily, contrasted with the neglected ethics behind it. Third-generation law enforcement, he'd inherited his position more than earned it, and the town had grown accustomed to looking away when his temper flared. "Another round," Holloway barked at Mina, the young waitress who visibly flinched at his tone. His uniform was immaculate, his service record less so. He watched Sergeant Major Mercer enter with narrowed eyes, a familiar contempt brewing. "Look at the old war horse," he muttered to Deputy Fletcher beside him. "Thinks he owns the place because he killed some foreigners half a century ago." Fletcher nodded mechanically, knowing better than to disagree. The tension between Holloway and the veteran had been building for months, Holloway's growing disrespect meeting Mercer's dignified silence. But tonight, something in the air felt different. The Tuesday rhythm was off-kilter, the conversational hum a beat too quick, as if the town itself sensed the coming collision. What nobody in Darla's Diner knew was that 230 miles away, Colonel Xavier Mercer was finishing a training exercise with his specialized military unit when his phone began to vibrate. Sergeant Major Mercer sipped his coffee slowly, savoring the warmth that eased the ache in his joints. His arthritic fingers curled around the mug while distant memories of battlefield chaos contrasted with the diner's evening calm. He nodded respectfully to Mrs. Langley at the corner booth, a war widow who understood sacrifice without needing words. Officer Holloway's voice grew progressively louder with each beer, his complaints about entitled veterans carrying across the diner. "They walk around like we owe them something," he sneered, loud enough for Mercer to hear. "My tax dollars already paid for their retirement." Mercer did what he'd done for months, absorbed the disrespect silently, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. His generation believed in restraint, in dignity over confrontation. He reached for his wallet, leaving an exact tip as always. "Hey, old man," Holloway called out, abandoning his booth to swagger toward the counter. "You hear me talking to you?" His breath reeked of beer and authority abused. The diner fell silent, conversations dying mid-sentence as patrons studied their plates with sudden interest. "Evening, officer." Mercer replied evenly, standing to leave. "I wish you well." "Don't patronize me," Holloway growled, blocking the older man's path. "Think your fancy title means something here? Sergeant Major?" He spat the rank like an insult. "Bet you weren't even in real combat, probably pushing papers while real soldiers died." Mercer's eyes, windows to battles that still haunted his dreams, met Holloway's. "Please, step aside, son. We both want a peaceful night." That word, son, struck Holloway like a match to gasoline. "Don't you dare call me son." His face flushed crimson as a childhood ghost roared in his ears. "You think you're better than me? Than us?" He gestured wildly to the silent diner. Mina stepped forward tentatively. "Officer Holloway, please." "Shut it," Holloway barked, making her retreat. He turned back to Mercer, finger jabbing toward the medals visible on the veteran's old service cap. "Those mean nothing in my town. Nothing." And with those words, the line was crossed. A boundary invisible but sacred, protecting not just a man, but what he represented. What happened next occurred with the terrible clarity that only true violence possesses. Officer Holloway's restraint, threadbare to begin with, snapped completely. His hand shot out, knocking Mercer's cap to the floor, the sacred symbols of valor and sacrifice trampled underfoot. "Pick it up," Mercer said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command that had once directed men through gunfire. Holloway's response was physical and immediate. With a savage shove, he sent the elderly man backward. Mercer's hip caught the counter edge as he fell, pain flashing across his weathered face. Then came the unthinkable. Holloway's fist connected with the veteran's jaw, an elderly head snapping sideways with the impact. Gasps filled the diner. Mina covered her mouth in horror. Deputy Fletcher half rose, conflict evident on his face, but he remained frozen between duty and brotherhood. "Not so tough now, are you, hero?" Holloway taunted, delivering a second blow that split Mercer's lip. Blood, the same blood spilled on foreign shores for American freedom, now stained the diner floor of his hometown. Mercer didn't raise his hands to fight back. Instead, he looked around the diner, meeting the averted eyes of neighbors he'd known for decades. Their silence was its own form of violence. Through bloodied lips, Mercer spoke with dignity and tact. "My son will hear about this." Holloway laughed, handcuffs already out. "Oh, I'm terrified. What's your boy going to do? Write a strongly worded letter?" He couldn't have known that Colonel Xavier Mercer commanded an elite military response unit specializing in hostage rescue, and that his phone was ringing at that very moment. The diner's collective cowardice hung heavier than the grease in the air. 23 townspeople watched as Officer Holloway dragged the bloodied veteran toward the door, Mercer's military cap still lying trampled on the floor. Not one person moved to help. Not one voice raised in protest. Mrs. Langley, the war widow, wept silently into her napkin. Manager Darla Simmons stared at the register, her knuckles white with suppressed rage, wondering when her town had lost its soul. Deputy Fletcher studied his coffee as if it contained absolution for his inaction. Mana, alone, found courage. As Holloway yanked Mercer through the door, she retrieved the veteran's cap, clutching it like a fallen flag, and whispered, "I'll call someone, I promise." Her trembling fingers found the number listed as Xavier in the old man's fallen phone. Colonel Xavier Mercer was finishing debriefing his team when the call came through. At 43, he carried his father's bearing, that same straight spine, unwavering gaze, and absolute commitment to honor. The differences lay in their eras. Where Thaddeus had faced jungles and guerrilla warfare, Xavier confronted modern threats across digital and physical battlefields. His specialized military response unit, the Umbra team, operated in shadows where conventional forces couldn't reach. "Colonel, it's Mina from Darla's back home," came the trembling voice. "It's your father." The story spilled out in fragments. The provocation, the assault, the public humiliation, and finally, the arrest. Xavier's expression remained unchanged as he absorbed each detail, but those who knew him recognized the dangerous stillness that settled over him. His team, watching from across the room, recognized it too. This wasn't their commanding officer calculating a mission parameter. This was something more primordial. "Mina," he said finally, his voice controlled. "Is my father injured? His lip is split badly. I think maybe a broken rib. They wouldn't let me help him." "Who stood up for him?" Xavier asked, already knowing the answer. The silence that followed told him everything. "I tried, Colonel, but I'm just—" "You did right by calling me," Xavier cut in, his tone gentler. "Now I need you to do one more thing. Tell everyone in that diner to go home. Tell them it's for their own safety." He ended the call and turned to his team, 11 men and women who had followed him into the world's deadliest situations. They stood without being called, already recognizing the mission in their commander's eyes. "My father's been assaulted by local police," Xavier stated flatly, "beaten for his military service in front of witnesses who did nothing." Captain Maya Reeves, his second-in-command and a third-generation military strategist, was already activating her tablet. "Location?" "Millridge, my hometown." Xavier checked his watch. "We're wheels up in 10. This isn't an official operation." No one needed to ask what that meant. They'd follow him anyway. Officer Holloway had dragged Sergeant Major Mercer to the small police station, bypassing booking procedures and proper protocol. He threw the elderly man into a holding cell, taunting, "Call your son now, old-timer. See if he can save you." Mercer sat on the metal bench, wiping blood from his lip with steady hands that had once assembled rifles in pitch darkness. He looked at Holloway not with hatred, but with something far more devastating: disappointment. "My son won't need to save me," Mercer replied quietly. "But God help you when he arrives," Holloway snorted, slamming the cell door. "Keep dreaming, old man." Chief Douglas Parks arrived 20 minutes later, alerted by a concerned dispatcher who'd noticed no proper arrest record. Approaching 60 himself and a Vietnam-era veteran, Parks had known Thaddeus Mercer for decades. "What the hell happened?" Parks demanded, seeing Mercer's condition. "Your officer happened," Mercer answered simply. Holloway lounged against the desk, unconcerned. "He was disturbing the peace, resisting arrest." "In Darla's diner?" Parks's disbelief was evident. "Tad Mercer hasn't disturbed peace since 1975. "You taking his side?" Holloway challenged. "Because if you are—" The threat hung unfinished as the station lights suddenly cut out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in dim red light. "Probably just a transformer," Holloway muttered, but his hand moved instinctively toward his holster. Chief Parks noticed something odd. A red dot had appeared on Holloway's chest. Then another, and another. Looking toward the windows, he saw what Holloway didn't: multiple laser sights cutting through the blinds from outside. The radio crackled to life, and a voice, calm, authoritative, and terrifyingly controlled, filled the station. "This is Colonel Xavier Mercer, United States Marine Corps Special Operations Command. You are currently targeted by multiple precision marksmen. The building is surrounded. You have assaulted a decorated Marine Corps veteran. Your next actions will determine whether you leave this building walking or horizontal." Through the window, they could now see them. 11 black-clad figures in tactical formation, weapons raised. Not National Guard, not regular police. These were apex predators of the military world. From his cell, Sergeant Major Mercer allowed himself a small smile. "Looks like my boy made good time," he said softly. The standoff at Millridge Police Station transformed the sleepy town center into something from a military thriller. Colonel Xavier Mercer's Umbra team had secured the perimeter with surgical precision. Communication lines controlled, escape routes monitored, and every officer inside illuminated by targeting lasers visible through the windows. Inside, Officer Holloway's arrogance crumbled like sand. This is illegal," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead as he backed away from the windows. "They can't deploy military against civilians." Chief Parks, watching the disciplined operation unfolding, understood something Holloway didn't. "They're not deployed," he said quietly. "Look closer. No insignia, no official vehicles. That's a son coming for his father, with friends." The station door opened with deliberate slowness. Colonel Xavier Mercer entered alone, though everyone understood the calculated risk was minimal with 11 precision weapons trained on potential threats. He wore no uniform, just black tactical gear without identification, but his bearing communicated his authority more effectively than any insignia could have. Xavier's eyes found his father immediately, cataloging the split lip, the discolored cheek, the careful way the older man held his side to protect injured ribs. Something ancient flickered in the colonel's expression, the same look primitive men wore when their kin were threatened. "Dad," he said simply, his voice controlled. "Xavier," Sergeant Major Mercer nodded, "told you not to make a fuss over me." A ghost of a smile crossed Xavier's face. "Yes, sir. I've never been good at following that particular order." He turned to Chief Parks, ignoring Holloway completely. "I believe there's been a mistake. My father appears to have been arrested without cause and physically assaulted while in custody." Parks, a reasonable man who recognized the catastrophic situation unfolding, nodded slowly. "I believe you're right, Colonel. Officer Holloway acted without authorization and against department policy." He moved toward the cell, keys in hand. "Sergeant Major Mercer is free to go. We'll be conducting a full investigation." Holloway erupted, his fear manifesting as rage. "You can't just let him go. This is intimidation. I'll have all of you brought up on charges." Xavier finally acknowledged Holloway's existence, turning toward him with glacial calm. "Are you the officer who struck my father?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with its pin removed. Before Holloway could respond, the station door burst open again, and with it came a tidal wave of accountability that would sweep away decades of unchecked power. The station door admitted not reinforcements but witnesses, townspeople from the diner led by Mina, their earlier cowardice transformed by the military presence into newfound courage. Behind them came local news reporters, alerted by anonymous tips, cameras already rolling. "These people," Xavier announced, gesturing to the civilians, "witnessed my father's assault. I believe they're ready to provide statements." Mrs. Langley stepped forward first, her widow's grief giving weight to her testimony. "I saw it all. Officer Holloway attacked Sergeant Major Mercer without provocation. The violence was—" her voice broke. "Unconscionable." One by one, the witnesses found their voices, conscience finally overcoming fear. Darla described how Holloway had been drinking on duty. Deputy Fletcher admitted he'd been too afraid of retaliation to intervene. Mina produced the veteran's blood-stained cap as evidence. With each testimony, Holloway seemed to physically shrink, his bluster evaporating as the truth emerged in irrefutable detail. The cameras captured it all: the damning testimonies, the veteran's injuries, the officer's disintegrating composure. "Based on these statements," Chief Parks declared, "Officer Bryce Holloway is suspended effective immediately, pending criminal investigation for assault, false imprisonment, and civil rights violations." When Parks reached for Holloway's badge and weapon, something in the disgraced officer snapped. With a roar of rage, he lunged, not at Parks or Xavier, but at the elderly Mercer, as if destroying the evidence of his crime might somehow save him. He never reached his target. Xavier moved with the lethal efficiency that had made him legendary in military circles, intercepting Holloway with the precise strike that left the larger man gasping on the floor. "That," Xavier said quietly, "was restraint. Something you should have exercised with my father." To the Umbra team waiting outside, Xavier gave a hand signal. Within seconds, they disappeared into the shadows, ghosts returning to the darkness. Their presence, while technically unofficial, had served its purpose, a reminder that actions have consequences, even in places that have forgotten. As paramedics attended to Sergeant Major Mercer's injuries, Xavier addressed the gathered crowd and cameras. "My father served this country with honor for 30 years. He survived 3 wars defending American values. The treatment he received today reflects none of those values." He helped his father stand, supporting the elderly man with gentle strength. "But I still believe in those values: justice, accountability, and respect for those who served. Today, Millridge is reminded of them." As father and son walked out together, the elder Mercer whispered, "Was bringing an entire tactical team really necessary, son?" Xavier smiled slightly. "No, sir, but it made a better point than a strongly worded letter." The aftermath spread through Millridge like wildfire, then beyond. Cell phone videos captured by diner patrons reached social media before midnight. By dawn, national news outlets had picked up the story. Elite military unit intervenes after police officer assaults 85-year-old Marine veteran. Public opinion crystallized swiftly and overwhelmingly. Veterans organizations mobilized support. Military forums buzzed with approval for Colonel Mercer's response. Legal experts debated the technicalities while acknowledging the moral clarity of the situation. The Department of Defense issued a carefully worded statement. While we neither confirm nor deny Colonel Mercer's current operational status or the existence of specialized units, we emphasize that all personnel were on approved leave during the time frame in question. The subtext was clear. They stood behind their own. For Bryce Holloway, consequences mounted with breathtaking speed. State prosecutors, unwilling to appear soft on abuse of power against veterans, filed multiple felony charges. His police union declined representation, citing actions falling grossly outside professional conduct. Former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to be tainted by association. Chief Parks, recognizing a watershed moment, initiated department-wide reforms, mandatory de-escalation training, stricter oversight of use-of-force incidents, and community accountability measures. Millridge Police failed not just Sergeant Major Mercer, he announced at a press conference, but every citizen entitled to respectful protection. Meanwhile, at Thaddeus Mercer's modest home, father and son sat on the porch swing that had survived 4 decades of harsh winters. Xavier had removed his tactical gear, now dressed in civilian clothes that couldn't quite disguise his military bearing. "Your mother would have been proud," Thaddeus said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Not of the theatrics," he added with a wry smile that pulled at his stitched lip, "but of the man you've become." Xavier absorbed the rare praise from his stoic father. "I learned from the best, sir. Different times now," Thaddeus mused. "In my day, we were taught to absorb disrespect, keep our heads down." "With respect, Dad, those days are over," Xavier replied. "Your generation suffered in silence so mine wouldn't have to." Inside, Xavier's team, now in civilian clothes, moved comfortably through the house. Captain Reeves set the dinner table while others prepared a meal, their lethal skills momentarily channeled into domestic harmony. "Quite a family you've built," Thaddeus observed. Xavier nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. His team wasn't just military colleagues, they were the family formed in fire, bound by honor codes that transcended blood. "They came for you without hesitation," Xavier said simply, "because that's what we do for our own." 3 months after what locals now called the Mercer incident, Millridge had changed in subtle but significant ways. The courthouse steps hosted the conclusion of Officer Holloway's trial, a swift proceeding resulting in a 5-year sentence for assault, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. As Holloway was led away in handcuffs, he caught sight of Sergeant Major Mercer watching quietly from across the street, Xavier standing protectively at his side. There was no triumph in the veteran's eyes, only the solemn acknowledgement of justice served. That evening, Darla's Diner hosted an unusual gathering. The Tuesday regulars had organized a formal recognition ceremony for Thaddeus Mercer. The diner, once the site of communal cowardice, now sought collective redemption. Veterans from 3 counties arrived in pressed uniforms adorned with medals that told stories of sacrifice most civilians could never comprehend. They formed an honor guard as Thaddeus entered, rendering salutes that spoke volumes across generations of service. Mayor Eliza Thompson, herself the daughter of a Vietnam veteran, presented Thaddeus with a key to the city. "This community failed you," she acknowledged publicly. "In doing so, we failed ourselves and the principles your service defended. This small token cannot erase that failure, but it symbolizes our commitment to never repeat it." Deputy Fletcher, now acting chief following Park's early retirement, announced the establishment of the Mercer Protocol, a mandatory training program teaching officers to recognize and respect military veterans in crisis situations. Most surprising was Mina's contribution. The young waitress had used her unexpected fame from the viral video to establish a community watchdog program monitoring police interactions and promoting accountability. "Courage isn't always about standing up in the moment," she said, wisdom beyond her years evident in her voice. "Sometimes it's about ensuring the moment never happens again." Throughout the ceremony, Xavier observed from the periphery, letting his father occupy the spotlight he deserved. The Umbra team had returned to their classified operations, though rumors persisted about their occasional surveillance passes over Millridge, just as a reminder. As the formal proceedings concluded, Thaddeus rose to speak. The room fell silent. These people who had once ignored his humiliation now hanging on his every word. "I wore this country's uniform for 30 years, he began, his voice carrying the gravitas of experience. "Not for recognition, not for privilege, but because I believed, still believe, in what America stands for at its best." He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on the veterans who understood, then the civilians who were learning. "What happened here wasn't about me. It was about remembering who we are, who we must strive to be, as Americans. We defend the defenseless. We speak for those without voice. We stand when others fall." He touched the Marine emblem on his cap. "And we never, ever leave our own behind." 1 year later, a new tradition had taken root in Millridge. Every Tuesday evening, Sergeant Major Thaddeus Mercer still walked the 4 blocks to Darla's Diner, his gait a little slower, but his back still military straight. Now, however, he rarely sat alone. Veterans from surrounding counties made the pilgrimage to share coffee with the man whose stand against injustice had rippled through police departments nationwide. Young officers from the reformed Millridge Police would stop by, listening to his stories with genuine respect. School teachers brought students to meet living history. On this particular Tuesday, Xavier had returned for a rare visit, joining his father at the counter. The diner fell quiet as patrons recognized the colonel whose tactical response had become something of a local legend. "Quite a change," Xavier observed, noting the respectful nods directed their way. Thaddeus sipped his coffee. "People remember when someone shows them who they truly are," he replied, "both the good and the bad." Across the diner, Mina, now working her way through criminal justice courses at the community college, delivered pie to Mrs. Langley's table. Her community oversight initiative had become a model adopted by 3 neighboring counties. "Was it worth it?" Xavier asked quietly. "The public spectacle, the trial, everything that followed?" Thaddeus considered the question, looking around at a community transformed not by force but by accountability and reflection. "It wasn't about punishment," he finally answered. "It was about restoration, of values worth defending." He nodded toward a young Marine in uniform entering the diner, who removed his cap with instinctive respect. "Some lessons need defending in every generation. That's the legacy that matters."